Welcome to the Root of It All podcast with Tree, where you will learn new habits for human betterment. We talk about all things related to personal growth, and everything is on the table. Each episode will explore different topics like self-care, mindfulness, goal setting, and more, with a focus on practical tips and actionable advice you can start implementing in your life today. Our goal is to help you become the best version of yourself and live a more meaningful life. So grab a drink, cozy up, take your dog for a walk, or go for a drive. Join us for some fun and meaningful conversations with some amazing humans. Let's grow together.
Hello, everyone, and this is Tree with The Root of It All, podcast with Tree, and today I have a very interesting and special guest. So I have Dominique Buchholz, and she is in Bismarck, North Dakota. She's a pastor, and she's also a hypnotist. And I'm so fascinated because we met in San Diego at the World Hypnosis Summit, and we started talking, and I was just so fascinated with what it is that you do. And I know everybody's listening. It's like, tell me more. And we will. We're going to get into it. And so first, teach us like how it is that you got into wanting to pursue a career of being a reverend or a pastor.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, hello, Tree, and hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to share some of my story and chat on it. So why did I become a pastor? I was kind of I'd say there's a couple different reasons, and it's ebbed and flowed over the years why I am where I am. But when I was really young, I just was at a really fabulous church growing up. Like a lot of people have not so fabulous experiences in the church world. But I was just in a really healthy, supportive, wonderful, faithful congregation called Trinity Lutheran Church in Bismarck, North Dakota. And my pastor was fun and engaged and real. And there was really there just wasn't a sense of judgment or anything like that. Like my youth group was just a place where teenagers could figure out life together in a safe and healthy spot. And all of the other circles I were in were good groups of friends, but they weren't all as safe and healthy, right, of a place to process. So I think a big part of it was I grew up in a space that I really wanted to be a part of continuing in the world. It's like this was a really healthy, important part of my life and upbringing, and a thing that I want to help create for other people too, because I was probably the only or one of the only people in my group of friends who enjoyed faith as part of their life and enjoyed church. And my friends, they teased me all the time. I had a tie-dye shirt that said, Jesus is my homeboy. I had so they would get me things to kind of joke about this part of me being this token Christian in the group. But I just looked around and was like, I wish all of you had this positive, good experience as well. So that was part of my motivation, was just being
That's awesome.
Creating that community in the world. So that's where it initially came from. And then I went and did a social work degree and did that because it was really open and vague. There's lots of options, right? I could go into hypnosis, I could go into therapy, I could go into ministry. But it was just kind of the language we use in the churches. It felt like a call. I kept hearing from other people, even when I tried to kind of focus on something else, that, have you ever thought about doing this? You seem to have the gifts for this in some way. And so I just kind of kept getting drawn back to going down that road.
So people kind of saw it in you and saw that you know what, that's a good match.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all of us, and even all the people that are listening and stuff like that, have had either an aha moment or a feeling that something really felt good. And you can probably chime into this as well, but when it comes to faith or being okay with the unknown or really surrendering into something that makes you feel so good, I truly believe that it's a very, very important thing when it comes to us as being human beings. Because if we don't have that, then And I think people are gravitating towards social media or grabbing onto even like playing video games, right? It's the same kind of like a heightened state of emotion that people are getting into, and it's an excitement. And if we put that or channel that energy, viewpoint, feeling towards something else that also is immersed in a community, like, oh my gosh, where do I sign up for that? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you're talking about if we look at it from this high level point of view, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so what would you like a couple years ago, well, not a couple years ago, actually, I think it's almost 10 years ago. Oh my gosh, okay, I'm aging myself. But it's so interesting because I was brought up, it was zero religion. And even up here in Canada, there's lots of different, avenues of religion. Like there's mosques, there's Buddhist temples, we have the Hare Krishna temple downtown Toronto, which is absolutely beautiful. I did filmed a pilot there for a movie. Yeah, so that's the only reason why I was there. I wouldn't have just woken up one day and be like, hey, let's go check out this Hare Krishna temple. Like, so what would you say to somebody if they're looking for what we're talking about, if they're looking for something to allow them to have that feeling, to allow them to actually find a community? Like, what would you suggest for somebody to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I see people posting this like on social media all the time, actually, in like moms groups and new to the community groups and that kind of stuff, right? Like, where do I go about doing this? Or people interested in church for the first time. I'm like, where do I start?
Mm-hmm.
And I often will just shoot a message that's like, let's get coffee, because I think it's a longer discussion, right? Like because every denomination has like strengths and weaknesses, right? And things that they're like, the Pentecostals are really good at listening to the Spirit and being expressive, and the Lutherans really value, among other things, like social justice and paying attention to tradition and history. And like, right, we talked about like my schooling took forever, right? 8 years from start to finish. You have to get a undergrad first, and then 4 years of seminary. You have to learn Greek and Hebrew and do all this stuff. And so like they value kind of maintaining this historical integrity, right? So it kind of depends like what will like spark a connection in that person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Feel good. So I think that's the first thing, is maybe visiting with somebody who has a sense about what to expect when you walk in these different doors, right? Or if you walk into the like the Buddhist temple, what to expect, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then just I think being bold, like it starts by showing up in those places, and knowing that some are going to be, they're full of humans, right? So some are going to be healthier than others, and some are going to be in a really thriving time, and some are going to be in a stressful time, and just kind of feeling out where feels like home when you're there.
Mm-hmm. And that is one thing that, like, when I was visiting all of these places, because I was genuinely curious about all kinds of different faiths, and everyone was so gracious. Like, there wasn't one place that I went in and they were like, why are you here? And then also on the other side of things, they weren't like trying to recruit me either. Like, they were literally genuinely like, and I guess I love the word that you used, being bold. Because I guess I was bold, because I drove past something, I'm like, ooh, and I turned around and I just like, and I would just, in my travels, just cool, and just stopped in 10, 20 minutes, just ask questions and things like that. And I love what you're talking about is hey, if somebody asks you that you'd say, hey, let's have a coffee. And I think that's a great thing for people to actually find somebody in different communities and to just talk to them, as opposed to, I would have loved to actually do that. And maybe I'll go back around and do that, actually, instead of just randomly showing up. And, because picking somebody's brain, and I hate even using that, sort of saying, for lack of a better word, But it really is this mood of curiosity, I think. And when it comes to almost all religions, and maybe you can chime in on this, but it's really this end love. Like it really stems from love and caring for all humans, right? Like what's your take on that?
Yeah, one of the like most fun parts of my seminary experience was I went to a place that's called the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California.
Hmm.
And my school was specifically a Lutheran school called PLTS, but it's a consortium of all these different schools and not just Christian, but there's also like a Jewish institute there and a Buddhist school and all kinds of different folks represented there. And we had to take classes at each other's schools. Um,
Nice.
and so it was just a really unique experience to get to be in a room full of people with all kinds of different perspectives and backgrounds and not kind of just be like stuck in our one little bubble of what we grew up with.
Hmm.
Uh, and I would say the common themes, right, were that people were looking to, on a personal level, connect with like a source of love and light and direction in their life, right? What we call God, right? To connect with this like broader source of life, and then to connect with other people from that place, right? To be able to be, use the language, shining that light to other people, right? Um, and discerning what it means to do that. Like in this situation, how do we shine light, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
always clear. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Um, and so I would say each of the traditions, right, it was trying to figure out how to faithfully do that, how to have practices that help us connect with the divine and practices that help us connect with the community in loving ways.
Hmm.
The ways that everybody goes about it is really different. Um, and the like the history it can be super fun to dive down that rabbit hole and see like how did all of these different traditions end up thinking and believing um, what they do. But that I would say is like the broad overarching theme of what kind of,
Hmm.
yeah.
And it is a really interesting thing, like how they all came about, right? And that would be probably like a 4-year course somewhere, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the cool thing too that I want to mention that you said is the fact that your experience growing up in a church where the pastor was fun and was open and was approachable or whatnot, where I think there's some places, and not even talking about religion, but even businesses, that they can have that same culture. People can have great experiences working in a specific business that has that leadership, just as what you were describing. Or they can have a business with leadership that's very rules oriented or very closed minded, and or an ego, or feeling like they have to prove something. So like you mentioned, we're all just people, and people are everywhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had, the pastor I was talking about when I was initially thinking about going into ministry said, when I was thinking about it, somebody said to me, if you can do anything else, do that thing. Because, like, being a pastor isn't the ministry, it's a way to
Mm-hmm.
do ministry and live this sort of life that we're talking about, right? One where you're like connected to something bigger than yourself, connected to God, and sharing love and light with the world. And we need those people outside of church walls just as much or more, or outside of temple walls, or outside of faith communities just
Mm-hmm.
as much or more as we need them inside of them. And as a pastor who like in my role, right, like often it can be like a little lonely sometimes because you're the person who's, it's just a different role, right? A different boundary than the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the people in the community naturally. But so the people who are that out in the community are my sources of light often, right? If I walk into a chiropractic office and it is just that energy, like you just walk in and it is warm and loving and
Mm-hmm.
non-judgmental, and the purpose is to really meet the person in front of you where they're at and really kind of intuitively listen to how you may be called, why you're called to be together that hour, right?
Yeah.
Um, and be sent better than you showed up. Those are the things that fill my cup.
And that's an interesting piece about, I think, religion and us as humans in general is this energy piece. Like we've all walked into a room and you just knew something was off. Or we've all walked into a room and you're like, oh, this feels nice. Right.
Yeah.
So, and there's nothing that you can quite put your finger on, but it's just an intuitive feeling that we feel. And everybody has had that experience. And so I guess too, like even, when we choose to be a part of a community, we know that we're going to consistently walk into that room and it's going to feel good.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's part of what you do is you create that experience for all of your, is it called a congregation? Is it called like, what's it called? Is it called a congregation? Yeah, okay. Yeah. um, so, and so one question that you said that you get asked all the time is how can you be like a pastor or a reverend and a hypnotist at the same time? So,
Yeah.
what's your answer?
Yeah. Well, I think there, my husband often jokes that when people ask him, like, what does your wife do? He works at a hospital doing anesthesia. He
Yeah.
always says he's hesitant to answer that question because he thinks they're going to know me less when they hear the answer instead of know
Oh,
me more. Like
okay.
if you, I don't know, you usually learn, you like feel like you know something about that person when you find out what they do. And he's always like, just like the number of like ideas people have in their head about both hypnosis and the church. He's like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's just um, not likely that they're gonna actually, think you're like a normal person in any way. Like that.
Well, and
But
it's also interesting too. So what I want to mention, so if whoever's listening to this, if you're just listening to it and you can't see Dominique is absolutely gorgeous, tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, I think.
yes.
But just absolutely gorgeous, young, beautiful, vibrant. Like, so when you think about like a pastor or a reverend, it's not what would pop like in my head. So even when, and maybe that's my bad. And not that I'm definitely the opposite of being a judgmental person. If anything, it drives my husband nuts because have zero judgment and I accept every human being. And, so when you first said to me, oh, this is what I do, I was like, what? And I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Like to just, and the fact that, it's such a different world. And maybe, you know what? Maybe I take that back. Maybe it's the same world. It's just, labeled differently,
Yeah.
right? Like it's totally, um, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna describe it in that. It's the same world. It's just labeled differently. And the energy that is put in a different place when it comes to community, right? Like here we are, part of the Master Hypnotist Society, and we are creating pockets of communities all over North America for what it is that we do. We have tons of clinics in the US, tons of clinics up here in Canada, and we're really spreading that beautiful energy of freedom because people come to us to really step into a newfound freedom, whether it's freedom of excess weight, freedom of smoking, freedom of habits, freedom of all kinds of different things. And so even when they're coming to your congregation, people are also looking for freedom of whatever it is that they're looking for, freedom of maybe the stresses of their life. And so they're stepping into that community to feel supported, to feel grounded, to have that beautiful faith, to know that God is helping them, guiding them in some sort of way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you put that beautifully. That was great. Um, and I guess I didn't really answer the question, so I'll circle back to like, how can these things go together? Like you said, like
Mm-hmm.
there's more in common with them than different, right? But so, my dad is Scott McFall, so I grew up around who founded the Master Hypnotist Society. So I grew up around both of these worlds. So they never were at odds with each other in my life or head. It wasn't really until I started being asked that question that I started to have to kind of think um, about that answer. But um, you know, so to the best description I can give people is just that, um, like my life of faith doesn't have anything in it that's against like learning how to use your mind and body effectively, right? Or shifting habits in order to better be able to do what we do in the church: love yourself, love God, love other people, right? And then in the hypnosis clinic, we're able to help people in really concrete ways, right? Provide like really concrete tools to help them do that. And I think the image people have is that hypnosis is maybe like some sort of control or something that would be anti-faith. But, you know, and I'm sure if folks listen to your podcast, they already know something about hypnosis and have probably heard this stuff before, but we know that hypnosis is a state of mind that it's not something to believe in or not believe in. If we attach things to our brain, we can see we're in theta brainwaves when we're hypnotized. We know that it's a state of mind we're in throughout the day, right? Like when we drive the car and daydream, or when we're responding to suggestibility of a commercial or anything like that. And so I just tell folks it's more like dehypnotizing people from what they've accidentally been doing and giving them some control over what they do by learning how to use their brain in an effective way. And now and then they can work together in cool ways, right? Like if it's a person of faith who has some bigger picture stuff they want to heal, certainly they can work together. But they can be, so they can work together or be two separate things, depending on what the person in front of us needs, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think is very important. Like many, if not almost all clients that I see, I have to have a conversation with them about what they believe. Because if we're trying to change something about ourselves, and this is what I believe, and chime in for sure. But if we're trying to change something about ourselves, we have to be okay with the unknown. If we're not okay with the unknown, then that means that we're stuck in something. So there has to be some form of, whether somebody believes in spirituality, whether it's just they believe that there's something and they don't know what to call it. That's also cool, right? But you have to believe in something to be more flexible as a human being, to really step into change, right? Like,
to successfully continue learning in life, we have to reach some level of self-acceptance, right? Because we can't just stop every time we fall off the bike or hate ourselves every time we fall off the bike. We have to have self-acceptance. And often that comes from understanding that we have innate and intrinsic value, and that there's a source of love that we are entitled to beyond ourselves, that we didn't have to earn in any way, right? And so these are faithful religious concepts, but also things that can really help anybody be able to make lasting change, because we can't beat ourselves up to lasting change, right? We'll stop doing it eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you imagine if we didn't? That'd be like every human being that fell off a bike at any point in time in their life, they're still on that ground freaking out.
Yeah.
So we'd be a world filled with just people, just like, oh, I fell off my bike, like freaking out, which isn't,
like religion has always been, and faith communities have been, a source of community and support and faith practices and developing relationships with God and with other people in my life. But I mentioned at the beginning, I know it's not the case for everybody, right? And I've certainly had clients come in who that wasn't the case for them, and there almost needs to be some there does need to be other places in the world, like the work you do and the work we do, to help people kind of maybe get a break from, if their religious community was really focused on rules instead of really focused on, like in the Christian church, following the ways of Jesus or loving God and loving our neighbor, right? Sometimes church can be the source of the lack of self-acceptance, right? So I don't mean to paint a picture of that. Whatever church you walk into or whatever faith community you walk into, surely you'll be met with this beautiful community. But that certainly is the hope, right? And
for sure.
What we're seeking out? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine any church or temple or anything that anybody walked in? You walk in and all of a sudden, like, oh, like just like this cue singing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is fascinating, like just the whole different belief systems when you look at all around the world of even rituals of what people immerse themselves in. I remember when I was in the fashion industry and I worked a lot like downtown Toronto with all kinds of different people that either imported clothes or I'd go in and help design the construction piece and then they'd get shipped overseas to get constructed. But there was this one woman that I was working with and she was from the Dominican Republic. So they have a lot of superstitious stuff like that they believe in and just which is interesting. And she always had like she was huge high energy and she's this tiny little thing. But anytime I'd walk in, she'd be like, "Oh my gosh, hi Tree, how are you? Oh, you just look lovely." And she'd just like go on. She'd like hug me, kiss my cheeks, hug me, kiss my cheek, and just she'd talk like, and it's almost like and not to like she was just the most beautiful human being, but it's like a puppy, like, "Oh, here, you're here, hi, right?" Like, and I remember going in there one day, and it was just something. I can't even remember what I said, but it was something that happened that morning. And it was like no. Somebody cut me off and I almost hit them. Right. And that was it. And that happens to almost everybody, almost every day, almost, right? Like, and it's just an everyday thing. And I don't even know why I mentioned it to her, but it was like, I just wound her up and she's like, "Oh my gosh, this is what you need to do. That's such a bad omen. That's such a bad omen. You have to go right now, go into the bathroom, put your underwear inside out. And then you're going to go home. You're going to get an apple, buy an apple on the way home. It has to be a special apple. You're going to write a little note. Do you remember the license plate number?" And blah, 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 like on and on to the point that I got so hyped up. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." I literally went into the bathroom, put my underwear on inside out. I was like, got so immersed in this energy. Like if I didn't do that, it was a bad omen and things are going to go terribly wrong for me. And I remember like I'm driving home and I'm like so intense, like white knuckled thinking like, "Okay, I got to get the apple. What did she say? Did I write it down?" Like I was like freaking out if I didn't do this. And it was about a 40-minute drive home. But the first 15, 20, 25 minutes, I was like, "Okay, all right, I'm going to do this." But then like I started getting closer to home and I'm like, "Wait a minute." like I remember like thinking like because my partner that I was with, the guy that I was with at the time, like I'm gonna like rush home with this apple and do all this stuff and he's gonna look at me like, "Are you nuts?" Like, and take my underwear off, put it in this apple and bury it in the backyard. Like like there was more to it. There was like this whole list. And so it in that moment it gave me this like, wow, like literally so many people believe all kinds of different things because in that moment, she literally was in the mood and energy that she was saving my life.
Yeah.
Like that she was saving my life and God love her. She was just the most loving person. And she, in her nervous system, was literally loving me in that moment.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that story is an interesting, I think, like metaphor for as we navigate
Yeah.
any type of community, right? But like especially a religious community, um, the energy is coming from like the life-saving place.
Yes.
And we talk about one of the analogies we use is like at Thanksgiving in the US, or like at any holiday, let's say there was a ham, and for generations they've cut off the end of the ham before they put it in the oven. And finally, like 5 generations later, somebody's like, "Why do we do that?" And they're like, "Oh, you just have to, right?" But then they find out that it's because like 5 generations ago, their pan was smaller and they had to. But it's not like a requirement of the recipe. It's not the spirit of the holiday, right? But yeah, so kind of just I think it's good to stay in touch with like what's the spirit of the ritual, what's the spirit of the law, what's the spirit of the rule,
Mm-hmm.
and for you, like you knew that the spirit of it was you being able, like she wanted you to be able to let go of this bad experience and move forward without it being a negative thing, right? That was the spirit of it. But like all the details of how you went about the ritual may or may not matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's good for us to kind of stay in tune with that in general. Yeah.
Well, hey, and it's a great example, like what you said, it's a great example of how people can just really make a mountain out of a molehill when it comes to, even if we're trying to get through stress, or if we're worrying about something, or just different emotions. And that's the great thing too with communities, whether it's in a religion, church, a pastor, whatever, or congregation, not pastor, getting the words right. And, but it really is. And I think people's takeaway when they're listening to this is really seek out your community, because there's such a loneliness that's happening with everybody. There are people on their phones. I just had a friend of mine that just has been with somebody for about 4 months, and they're thinking about moving in together. And he said, we go to bed, but we're both on our phones. And it's not I don't think that's a good way to start a relationship or even anybody even listening to this, if that's what's happening even in your own home, that be curious of how you can change that, how you can get either more physical or more conversation, or even start the conversation by saying that you listen to this podcast, and be curious about what the belief system is of even the person that you're with, even if you've been with them for 20 years or 30 years or 5 years, like have that conversation. Or do you have a community together, or do you have community separately? Or
I think the last place that I got to do ministry was doing campus ministry at a college.
What is that? Doing what ministry?
Campus ministry. So like I worked at a college, and so instead of in a church, I was.
So campus ministry, that means that you're
like a college
campus. Oh, okay. Yeah. So okay. No. So you're in a college, like on a campus.
Yep.
Okay. When you first said camp, I'm like out in the wilderness. Like
I've done that too.
I was just gonna say, because I remember you telling me that you did that too. Okay. All right. So we'll get to the out in the camp, but let's go to the campus first. Okay. You were doing campus ministry. Got it. Go.
And that ministry taught me, well, I'm actually, before that, I was in a church doing young adult ministry for people who had graduated college, but were still kind of in that like 20s, their early 30s phase of life. And when we looked at research about those generations and stuff, and then I had 50 one-on-one conversations with people in that age range, just to get
a sense of
what is going on in your life, what's a source of stress, what's a source of joy, who are we as a generation of people, and what might God be calling us to do? And one of the number one sources of stress was loneliness, in the outside with that, and in our conversations with people. And I mean, I think the people listening to this, like we've all experienced this, right? Like it has to resonate, because it's it affects everything. It's like our mental health has gone down significantly, and I'm in the US, so I'm speaking from that perspective. So I don't know if in Canada that's true too, but the amount of anxiety and depression and that sort of stuff is wild, right? And that's just not something that has been very true throughout the rest of history, that we've been so detached from community, for a million reasons, right? It's more normal to move away from home now instead of stay close to your sources of community. It's like all of our sources of institutional community, not just churches, but all the little clubs that have existed have like tanked in membership and are struggling to keep their doors open, right? And then we're on our devices and all of that kind of stuff. So it was such a low-hanging fruit, like such an easy way to really make a wild difference in people's lives, to simply gather together in person and say, hey, we all feel this loneliness. When you're sitting next to somebody at the bar, and actually we would meet at like bars and coffee shops and stuff, and because people aren't that likely to walk into a church for the first time, but they're certainly there, right?
Yep.
And when you're sitting next to this person and feeling like, oh, I wish I had a group of girlfriends or whatever, so do they, right? Like that. We
Yeah.
had 50 one-on-one conversations and they all said the same thing. So I don't remember exactly where I started with this. Oh, but campus ministry. But so
Mhm.
do like working with that age group uh, taught me a lot about just what a deep need this
Of
is, and
of
how,
community.
yeah, and how
Mhm.
easy it is to fix. It's just as easy as exercise or drinking water or eating healthy
Yeah.
to help our body, right? Like it feels intimidating and hard, but it's actually not. Like when we start showing up in places that there's a chance to build community, or we start being the person who's willing to be curious and ask some questions of the people around us,
Hmm.
eventually things grow out of that
Hmm.
that are really just like deeply needed by our souls, you know? For
Yes,
yeah.
so deeply needed by our souls. That's such a great way to put that. I mean, us as a species, we're meant to be in community. And even when you look at all kinds of other species, they're all in groups.
Mhm.
Like there's never just like, one bird hanging around. Like like everything is in communities. And so it's even with and I think, don't quote me on this, but even with elephants, like when an elephant has a baby elephant, that the community raises that elephant, like all the moms, moms, female elephants, they're moms. Um, but so it's more of like a community thing. And with a lot of, and it's true even when you look at us as a species, when we were living in villages, even the natives, like indigenous people, a lot of the women took care of all the kids as a whole. Like everybody was a place, even with indigenous cultures, the grandmother, whatever, I forget I think it's the tribe. So whether they're what animal they are, like whether they're a bear or a wolf or a hawk or whatever it is, that the grandmother, whatever the grandmother is, that's what all the kids are. Um, and it's just so fascinating how us as humans, that when we're trying to prove something, we're segregating ourselves even further away from our natural truth of who we are as human beings when it comes to connecting. And I get a sense too that even right now when people get lonely, they end up in like anger or resentment, and it takes them even further away. It's like they're like, well, I'm pissed and I'm going to be over here, whether you like it or not. It's like, well, okay, how's that helping you? Like, so I like the comedic undertone, and I've like I said, when I was going around and just visiting all these different kinds of churches and stuff, there's this one, and this reverend or pastor, he was just so funny. Like he was reading something from the Bible, and then he'd make it relatable to that day and age, that like to everyday life. And it was so funny because I was sitting there listening and listening, and then I just like put up my hand because I had a question. And I just, yeah, and it wasn't even like, it was so kind of inappropriate because it's like, right? But the guy, he's like, yes. And I just asked the question, and everyone kind of looked at me, and he just answered it. And after, I was like, that was really inappropriate. Like, so, but it was just so natural, and I was so immersed in what he was saying. But it was I actually went back for a bit,
I bet
specifically when he was
that
there.
was
Yeah.
probably a highlight story for that person, right? Like that, yeah, that probably felt inappropriate. It was probably a huge gift to everybody there, though, who are used to being there every week, and they've been there since they were 5, and they're just doing their thing. To have somebody be like, "Wait, this is super interesting, and I have a question about it." They're like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is yeah."
And who knows, maybe that's a thing that they kept going on. I don't know. Because but I was so immersed the way that he was almost translating from the actual Bible to everyday life. And it just
Yeah,
made so much sense in my brain,
yeah.
of
That's
what he
something
was.
else I would say to people is when you go to read an ancient text, whether it's the Bible or a different one, I mean, it's ancient, right? It's thousands of
Yeah.
years old. So if you feel like this doesn't make any sense, there's nothing wrong with you. It does kind of require a little bit of cultural translating, language translating, a little bit of figuring out.
Mhm.
But there's also a lot there that you can certainly get the big picture message of. So it's still totally worth doing some exploring yourself. And
Oh, 100%. And I think the big theme of what it is that we're talking about is expanding your mind, right? Expand your mind, be more flexible, be more open to allow your mind, body, spirit to experience something new. I think overall that's yeah. Is there something just before I know I've taken up so much of your time. It's actually longer. This is such a great conversation. It's longer than what I normally go for. So thank you for your time. Is there anything that you want to say just to leave people with?
I grab really quick a book off my shelf.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. She's so sweet. Is that a record player you have there? Is it a record player? That's so fascinating. So people that are listening, she just went to get a book and there's like this kind of like buffet table behind her and it looks like, is that a record player?
It is a record player.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. That's awesome.
Purchase that was on my husband's list of wants for a long time.
Awesome. Yeah, so show us this book. Tell us about this book.
Okay, so speaking of like creating community, having a sense of humor, being open to new things, this book there's also a documentary on Netflix actually of this conversation, but I think the book is better.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's called The Book of Joy, and it's the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, who are good friends. One of them is Buddhist and one of them is Christian. They're both like, for those who don't know, they're both big deals in their traditions. And them kind of spending the time they do with each other just kind of breaks some boundaries and opens up possibility, I think, for all of us figuring out how to do this. But it's just a really fun book of they get together on purpose for a few days just so that people can write this book about what they're like when they're together. Because they have both been through really, really difficult stuff, like being imprisoned, like being on the run and having to flee their community, like all kinds of stuff.
Oh, wow.
And they have this just like deep faith and this deep sense of joy, even in the midst of pain and sorrow, and these open minds that allow them to be friends with one another and model that for other people. But so I think this would be a fun next step for people if they're
awesome.
Curious.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll put all of your information in the show notes, and then I'll also get the Amazon link for that book, and I'll put it in the show notes as well if anybody wants to get it. And even maybe if I'll find the Netflix link to if anybody wants to watch it, because I think that's a really good first step to just expanding your mind, just being curious about any kind of culture, really, like, you know, just seeing what resonates with you, what feels good for you, in your body, heart, spirit, soul. So yeah, so thank you so much for this conversation. What a great conversation to have, and for people like, yeah, I'm glad we bumped into each other in San Diego.
Same. This was a blast. I'm going to send you one other book that I can't remember the title of right now, but it's about this woman who put a picnic table in her front yard to create community with her neighbors. That is like, so this is the expand your mind religion part. And then that book would be the next step for people who are like, how do I make friends and build community?
Yes, please do. Please do. And we'll have both in the show notes for everybody to click on, check out, buy if they want to. So awesome. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Well, folks, that's a wrap for today's episode of The Root of It All with Tree. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. But before we go, I just wanted to remind you that you can follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook or Instagram. And we will be posting motivational quotes and behind the scenes content that you won't want to miss. You can always sign up to come live while we're filming this, or even join us online through Zoom. We always offer open question and answer after each episode that we don't record, so it's all private, but you can get more involved. So sign up for free at businessgrowthresults.com, and we're going to cover all kinds of different topics that you're not going to want to miss. And if you're looking for that one-on-one guidance or help, be sure to book a free screening. You can do that at burlingtonhypnosis.ca or call 905-634-4777. And finally, you can catch our podcast on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. So be sure to subscribe and never miss an episode. Thanks for listening.